pollster and director of JL Partners, Scarlett Maguire, is in the studio in possibly the best jumper I've ever seen. Loving that, pretty in pink. Scarlett, come on, hit us with your exclusive GB News polling. What is it saying?
Yes, so we polled 520 current and recent viewers of GB News over the 17th to 20th of June. I should say, sort of small disclaimer, there's a margin of error of just over 4%, so 4.3%.
Okay.
But we found that Nigel Farage standing for reform has had an impact on the race, in that GB News viewers are now more likely to vote Reform than they are Conservative. Labour still ahead, though. So we have Labour on 38%, Reform on 25%.
Ooh, that's punchy.
The Conservatives on 24%.
Wow.
And then all the other smaller parties sort of on less than 10%.
Hang on a minute. How does that work? Because if they get that vote share, but obviously it doesn't translate to the seats, then that's nuts. If we had a situation where Reform had a bigger vote share than the Tories, but actually far fewer seats, then it will look as if the people who have voted for Reform aren't represented in Parliament adequately and engender a massive campaign for proportional representation.
Well, quite. So this is just GB News viewers. So if this was to be replicated across the country, though, yes, I think it could cause some upset. Although, if Reform polled 25% of the vote, they would get quite a lot of seats.
Also, as I'm writing this, bear in mind, viewers, this is the first time I've heard this polling, so I'm just reacting live to the numbers. 38% of GB viewers and listeners want to vote for the Labour Party.
Absolutely. So we found in some ways it does mirror the population as a whole. Labour are ahead. It's a smaller lead than Labour have in general. So the latest average for Labour is 21 points ahead of the Conservative Party. Here we have them 14% ahead of the Conservatives and 13%. So with a smaller lead, but still a substantial one.
But then if you add up Reform and the Tories, you get about 50. So the majority are backing righties. But the point is, you know, all of this talk about, oh, GB News, it's for certain types of people with certain kind of president. That's nonsense, isn't it? There's a massive Labour following here.
Well, it's not what we've seen in our data, and we've been tracking this for the last, I think, at least a month. Might be a bit longer, actually. But yes, we've been tracking this, and yes, that's not what we've seen. We found that a sizable amount of the, in fact, you know, here you can see a plurality of GB News viewers want to vote Labour at this election.
All right, fair play. How about Reform, then? Where do you think they're going to top out? Because I think 25... I'm getting this is a small sample and it's a GB News sample. So we did have some kind of quite punchy Matt Goodwin polling last week suggesting that they were an outlier. But I'm thinking that if you made an average of all of the polling, it's kind of putting Reform at about 19%. Is that right, Scarlett?
It's nearly right. So it's 17%, which is basically the same ballpark. But I think it's astonishing. So you started the campaign with Labour 20 points ahead. They're now technically, if you look at the average, 21 points ahead. Fine. It's in that region. Both Labour and Conservatives have seen their vote reduced. What is astonishing is that at the beginning of the campaign, the Conservatives had a 12-point lead on Reform.
Wow.
Now it's 3 points. That is the opposite direction of what Number 10 wanted to happen. They thought Reform voters were going to be there to be squeezed, and instead there's now more of them.
No, Farage is squeezing the Tories. Speaking of the man himself, how's it looking in Clacton? Because the Telegraph did the polling with Savanta in the week, suggesting that Reform would win no seats, and also that the PM, Rishi Sunak, would lose his seat. Let's deal with Farage first of all. Is he going to win Clacton? Because it's going to be very embarrassing if he doesn't.
I think Nigel Farage will win Clacton. So we, JL Partners, just did a poll in the constituency that got released, and that showed that Nigel Farage not just won, but sort of stormed home in Clacton, and 48% of the vote. Conservatives on 21. I think the most astonishing thing of that is that would be a 51% vote share reduction for the Conservative candidate on the last election.
Swing is massive there.
Mad.
Mad swinging. All right, that sounds a bit dodgy, actually. Sorry, I'm not saying anything about the people of Clacton and swinging. The PM, is he going to lose his seat? Things are looking dicey on the doorstep everywhere for the Tories.
They are, and it's a good question. I think some people in the Conservative Party are definitely worried that he might become the first Prime Minister ever to lose his seat. But I know. We actually did a focus group in Richmond and Northallerton, so the sort of new constituency that he's standing in this time. We spoke to only former Conservative voters, and they were all incredibly critical of Rishi Sunak and the party and planned to vote for other people. Now, obviously, focus groups are not representative, but I think they give you quite a good flavour of how people are thinking and the sorts of things they are saying. And one after another, they were very critical. They were critical about the delivery of the Conservative Party and what they've achieved over the last 14 years. But they were also critical about Rishi Sunak personally. And actually, it was just after Gamblegate. We'd not intended the focus group to be about it, but they were bringing it up and they were saying it's just like Partygate all over again. And it shows that Rishi Sunak's not in control.
I love that you're calling it Gamblegate. I said Bettinggate, but Gamblegate,
exactly,
is much better. Well done, Scarlett. Trying to take my job. Let's talk about shy conservatism. I've got to read out some candidates as well now that we've mentioned these different people. Sunny will tell, I must leave time for that, I'm telling the producers. Shy conservatism. I only say this because are people going to admit to the likes of JL Partners and others that they're voting Tory? They might be embarrassed, but deep down, when they get in the privacy of the ballot box, they might tick the blue box and just not tell anyone.
It's always a potential. I think it's maybe less of a problem this time round, but something that I know actually that sort of both parties are actually quite keen to talk about at the moment is that there are millions of undecided voters in the country still. And, you know, we've seen so far how volatile the electorate can be. I think one thing we can say is that unless there has been some unprecedented polling error, which I think looks very unlikely given all the underlying metrics as well.
1992, pollsters had egg on their face the morning after, but go on.
Yeah. I think pollsters have learned lessons. But yes, exactly. Yes. Yeah, no. But I think if you look at it, it's the number of undecided voters wouldn't be able to claw Rishi Sunak back a win.
Scarlett, we have to leave it there because I'm being reminded I need to read out candidates' names. I should know this off by heart. So, Nigel Farage is obviously one of the candidates in Clacton, but the others are Jovan Owusu-Nipal for Labour, Giles Watling for the Conservatives, Matthew Bensalem for the Liberal Democrats, Natasha Osborne for the Green Party, Craig Jameson for the Climate Party, Tony Mack is the Independents, Tassos Papan Astasiou is there for the Heritage Party, and Andrew Pemberton is there for UKIP. Thank you to Scarlett Maguire. You'll be back, I'm sure, with some exclusive GB News polling next week. I'd like to thank all of my guests today.